So there's been this massive erosion of trust in the world. And because of that, for folks who are listening to the pod and longtime listeners, you've probably heard us a couple times talk about Balaji. So at Balaji's on Twitter, Balaji Srinivasan, who was the chief technology officer at Coinbase for a long time, had a biotech company, one of the predominant thinkers on the internet from my perspective. And he shared some pretty interesting data why intellectual property, from my point of view, is going to become a key marketing skill set. And he shared some data on Americans' trust in newspapers and television news. And so for everybody listening, in basically 1990, there was about 45% of Americans had a great deal or quite a lot of trust in television news. And today, that is down from over 45% to 11%.
Oh my God.
And in the same period of time, newspapers had about 39% of Americans had a great deal or quite a lot of confidence in newspapers. And today that is down to 16%. So there's been this massive erosion of trust in the world. And because of that, businesses are looking at new ways to reach their audiences because the old ways of reaching their audience just don't work anymore. And that's why people are going to Google and Facebook. That's why people are going to TikTok. And that's why marketers are using new tactics to try to build brands and reach people, because the media infrastructure of this country, at least in America, and I think beyond America, is very weak right now, and the sentiment and trust around it is very weak. And I think, Kieran, that was one of the thesis you and I took on when we bought The Hustle and we decided to build a lot of our own media efforts, is that we wanted to have more control and an opportunity to build trust versus spend more and more money and time being a part of industries that were becoming less trusted. Right? And so this also leads into the topic about intellectual property. And intellectual property is how we actually think about licensing and taking advantage of ideas online today to build brands and drive growth for businesses. And I want to kick it off to you. I know you've got some thoughts on this topic around intellectual property and why marketers need to care about it way, way more the next 10 years than they have the last 10 years.
Yeah, and I think a lot of this is coming from Web3. I think Web3 is reshaping how we think about IP and the kind of power, the impact of IP. So I'll start off with a quick example, and we can get into. I'll get into a quick example, and then I have something else a little bit later I'd love to get into as well. But so Moonbirds, Moonbirds, Kevin Rose, ex-Dig, well-known investor, very, very big in Web3, has tons of different businesses with M3, has a great podcast. So Moonbirds is an NFT project that he released from the Proof community, I think it was called. They've done over 500 million in sales this year, the most successful, I think, NFT, or one of them most successful this year. When they sold Moonbirds, when you actually bought a Moonbird NFT, you actually own the IP, right? So that was like, you were buying it in part because, I don't know if that's the reason you would buy it, but you actually own the IP. And what does that mean? Well, I actually can own the IP, and I actually can go and build things on top of this IP, but if you want to use that, you have to pay me royalty. Kevin came out with a pretty interesting post recently where he said, we're going to move all Moonbirds royalty, or we're going to move their IP license into something called CC0, Creative Commons license, which means really there's no copyright reserved, which means I can use Moonbirds in anything I want. I don't have to pay anything. I don't have to pay anyone a royalty. So why was this interesting? It's pretty interesting because he described it as the power of like the distribution power of having a freemium IP. And so if you think about Ethereum, if you compare it to like a platform like Ethereum, which is a decentralized open source platform that has a smart contract functionality, but it allows other people to build decentralized apps on top of that and extend its functionality and extend awareness for Ethereum. Very much like that. That's how they think about IP, as a way to extend Moonbirds, right? I can now come in and all these creators can kind of build on top of the IP of Moonbirds, get a lot of additional distribution from Moonbirds, and that's one of the ways the project can grow. Now, if you're a Moonbird holder, you probably feel good or bad about that because you bought it thinking you own the IP. But that's when I started to think, Kipp, and I think I pinged you when we were thinking about things for this show, like, wow, IP is a pretty interesting way to grow brand and awareness for your project. Like, open it up to your community and see what interesting things they do with it.